They share your blood, but not your respect. They call it family, yet their actions feel like distance. And somewhere in between tradition and expectation, you start questioning a painful truth. Why does being connected by birth not always mean being valued by heart? Because respect was never meant to be inherited. It was always meant to be earned. Respect is not something that arrives just because you share the same bloodline. It is not a silent agreement written at birth, nor a hidden rule that automatically makes one person worthy of another's trust or admiration. In real life, respect behaves very differently from what many people expect. It is shaped slowly through behavior, consistency, honesty, and the way a person treats others when there is nothing to gain. A family bond may create closeness, but it does not guarantee emotional value or mutual understanding. That is where many people get confused and hurt, because they assume connection alone is enough to secure respect. There are individuals who grow up believing that their family title alone gives them authority over others' time, emotions, or decisions. They expect loyalty without effort and obedience without understanding. But respect does not respond to labels, it responds to actions. If someone consistently dismisses your feelings, ignores your boundaries, or only shows up when it benefits them, then the emotional connection starts to weaken, no matter how strong the biological tie may be. Over time, this creates a silent distance that words cannot fix. True respect is built in small moments. It is built when someone listens without interrupting, supports without judging, and stands by you even when it is inconvenient. It is reflected in how a person treats you when they are upset, not just when everything is calm. Blood may connect people physically, but respect connects them emotionally. Without that emotional connection, even the closest relatives can feel like strangers sharing the same history, but not the same understanding. Many people struggle with this reality because society often teaches that family must always come first, no matter what. But what happens when that same family repeatedly crosses emotional limits? What happens when there is no appreciation, no understanding, and no effort to maintain healthy communication? In such situations, expecting automatic respect becomes a source of frustration. It is important to understand that respect is not a gift given because of obligation. It is something earned through mutual care and emotional responsibility. When respect is missing, relationships begin to feel heavy instead of comforting. Conversations become cautious, interactions feel forced, and emotional distance grows even while sitting in the same room. This is not because love does not exist, but because respect has not been nurtured. Without respect, even love starts to feel like pressure instead of peace. That is why many people eventually realize that they cannot continue giving unlimited emotional access to those who do not value their presence. At its core, this truth is not about rejecting family, it is about redefining expectations. It is about understanding that connection alone is not enough to build a healthy relationship. Respect must be mutual, consistent, and earned through behavior, not assumed through bloodlines. Once a person accepts this, they stop chasing approval and start valuing their own emotional boundaries, and in that realization, they find something powerful, peace that is not dependent on who shares their name, but on who truly respects their existence. There is a quiet kind of disappointment that comes when you realize that someone can know your entire history and still not stand by your present. They may have watched you grow, shared your childhood space, or been present in the same family circle for years, yet when it truly matters, their support feels absent or conditional. This is where the illusion breaks, because familiarity is often mistaken for loyalty, when in reality, the two are completely different worlds. Knowing someone deeply does not automatically mean you are aligned with them emotionally or morally. A person can be aware of your struggles, your strengths, even your most vulnerable moments, and still choose distance when you need support the most. That is because knowledge of your life is not the same as commitment to your life. Loyalty requires presence, consistency, and emotional investment. Familiarity only requires time and shared space, and time alone does not guarantee trust or solidarity. Many people carry the expectation that those who have known them the longest will naturally be the ones who protect them the most. But life often reveals a harder truth. Some of the most painful moments come when you realize that people who have seen your journey from the beginning are not necessarily the ones who will stand with you in your difficult chapters. Instead, they may observe from the sidelines, offer surface-level concern, or sometimes even distance themselves entirely when things become uncomfortable. True loyalty shows itself in silence during chaos, in presence during struggle, and in consistency when life becomes unpredictable. It is not measured by how well someone knows your past, but by how strongly they stand in your present. A loyal person does not need reminders of your worth. They demonstrate it through actions without being asked. On the other hand, someone who is only familiar may still require constant explanation, reassurance, or emotional negotiation just to show basic support. This misunderstanding often leads to emotional confusion. People assume that shared memories automatically create shared loyalty, but that is not always the case. Just because someone laughed with you in better days does not mean they will stand with you in difficult ones. Just because they know your background does not mean they respect your growth. Loyalty is revealed when comfort is replaced by challenge, when support requires effort, and when staying becomes a choice rather than a habit. When this reality becomes clear, it can feel unsettling. It forces a person to reevaluate relationships that once felt secure, but it also brings clarity. It helps distinguish between those who are simply part of your history and those who are part of your emotional foundation. Not everyone who knows you is meant to walk with you, and not everyone who walks away is necessarily disloyal. They may have simply never been truly invested. Understanding this difference helps a person stop expecting emotional depth from those who only ever offered surface-level connection. It teaches a valuable lesson. Loyalty is not proven by memory, but by presence. And once this truth is accepted, expectations become more realistic, emotional pain reduces, and relationships are no longer measured by time spent together, but by the quality of support shown when it is needed the most. There is a heavy emotional burden that comes when love is no longer freely given, but quietly expected. It does not arrive with warmth or sincerity, it arrives with pressure. It feels like you are constantly being pulled by invisible threads of duty, tradition, or guilt, as if your emotions are not entirely your own anymore. In such situations, what is often called love is actually something far more complicated. It becomes emotional obligation, and over time it can quietly drain a person from the inside. Real love has a sense of ease in it. It allows space, understanding, and mutual respect without forcing anyone to lose their individuality. But emotional obligation works differently. It is built on expectations that are not openly discussed but strongly felt. It can sound like unspoken rules. You must always respond. You must always forgive. You must always stay connected no matter how you are treated. These expectations are often disguised as loyalty or respect, but deep down they are rooted in pressure rather than genuine care. When a person begins to live under emotional obligation, they slowly start losing their sense of peace. Every interaction feels like a responsibility instead of a choice. Even moments of silence can feel heavy, as if something is being owed. The heart becomes cautious, not because of lack of love, but because love is no longer safe. It has become conditional, and anything conditional eventually starts to feel exhausting. In many families and close relationships, people are taught that love means sacrifice without limits, but sacrifice without balance turns into emotional depletion. A person begins to give more than they receive, not always because they want to, but because they feel they must. Over time, this creates an internal conflict. The mind says, this is family, or this is love, but the heart quietly feels tired and unacknowledged. That disconnect creates emotional confusion that is hard to explain to others. What makes emotional obligation especially painful is that it often goes unnoticed by others. From the outside, everything may appear normal. People may even say, you are lucky to have such connections. But inside, the experience feels very different. It feels like your emotional boundaries are constantly being stretched, and your personal well-being is slowly being placed second to expectations that never end. Genuine love, on the other hand, does not demand emotional exhaustion. It respects limits. It understands that care does not mean control and presence does not mean pressure. It allows people to say no without fear of guilt and to step back without being labeled as ungrateful. In healthy relationships, love becomes a choice that feels safe, not a responsibility that feels heavy. The moment a person recognizes the difference between real love and emotional obligation, something begins to shift inside them. They start to understand that they are not required to sacrifice their peace to maintain every connection. They realize that true relationships do not collapse when boundaries are introduced, only the unhealthy ones do, and that realization brings a quiet but powerful clarity. In the end, emotional obligation may look like love on the surface, but it does not feel like love in the heart. Real love brings comfort, not pressure. It gives strength, not exhaustion. And once a person experiences the difference clearly, they begin to choose relationships that allow them to breathe freely instead of those that slowly take that breath away. There comes a moment in life when you realize that staying in certain relationships is costing you more than leaving them ever would. Not because you stopped caring, and not because you became distant in emotion, but because your inner peace started asking for protection. That is when distance stops being an act of rejection and starts becoming an act of self-respect. It is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, calm, and deeply necessary. Many people are raised to believe that staying connected at all costs is a sign of loyalty. They are taught to tolerate, adjust, and remain available even when they are emotionally drained. But over time, this constant availability begins to take a toll. You start noticing how certain interactions leave you feeling heavier instead of lighter. Conversations that should bring comfort begin to create tension. Moments that should feel safe start to feel emotionally exhausting. And slowly you begin to question whether being constantly present is truly healthy. Distance in such situations is not about punishment or anger. It is about clarity. It is the space you create when your mind finally recognizes that not every relationship deserves unlimited access to your emotions. It is the boundary that forms when your heart decides that peace is more important than pressure. And although it may feel uncomfortable at first, it often becomes the first step toward emotional healing. There is also a common misunderstanding that stepping back means you are being disrespectful or ungrateful. But in reality, protecting your emotional well-being is not disrespect, it is self-awareness. You are not required to stay in environments where your voice is constantly dismissed, your feelings are repeatedly ignored, or your presence is only valued when it is convenient for others. Respecting yourself sometimes means creating space where disrespect cannot continue. Distance also allows you to see relationships more clearly. When you are constantly inside a situation, emotions can blur your judgment. You may keep hoping things will change, keep adjusting your behavior, or keep explaining yourself in ways that never seem to be enough. But when you step back, even slightly, you begin to see patterns more clearly. You notice who truly respects your presence and who only values your availability. That clarity is often painful at first, but it is also freeing. What makes this realization powerful is that it shifts control back into your hands. Instead of reacting to every expectation, you begin to choose your responses. Instead of constantly explaining your feelings, you begin to protect them. And instead of feeling guilty for needing space, you begin to understand that space is sometimes the only way to preserve emotional balance. Healthy distance does not always mean cutting people off completely. Sometimes it simply means reducing emotional access, setting boundaries, or stepping back from situations that repeatedly drain you. It is about creating a healthier rhythm in your relationships, one where your peace is not constantly sacrificed for the comfort of others. In the end, distance becomes a form of self-respect when it protects your emotional stability without destroying your inner peace. It is not the absence of care, but the presence of wisdom. It is the understanding that you cannot grow in environments where your emotions are constantly overlooked. And once you accept that truth, you stop seeing distance as loss and start seeing it as the space where healing finally begins. Time has a way of revealing what words often try to hide. In the beginning, people can appear consistent, caring, and deeply involved in your life. They may speak with warmth, show interest in your journey, and make you feel valued in their presence. But as circumstances change, when you are no longer as convenient, or when your value is no longer tied to what you provide, something subtle begins to shift. And it is in that shift that truth slowly rises to the surface. There is a quiet reality in human behavior. Intentions are not always visible at first, but they become clear with time. When someone truly values you, their presence remains steady even when there is nothing to gain. They do not disappear when life becomes complicated, and they do not only appear when they need something. Instead, they stay consistent, not because they are forced to, but because their connection is genuine. Their respect is not dependent on benefit, it is rooted in character. On the other hand, there are relationships where presence is conditional. Everything feels balanced only when it is convenient. The moment expectations are no longer met, or the moment support is required instead of received, distance begins to grow. Sometimes it is slow and silent, other times it is sudden and obvious. But either way, it reveals an important truth. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay in it with the same level of depth. This realization can be difficult, especially when emotional attachment is involved. It is not easy to accept that someone who once felt close can become distant when circumstances change, but life has a pattern of showing consistency through actions rather than words. Promises may sound strong in moments of comfort, but true character is exposed in moments of inconvenience. That is where real intentions become visible. What makes this even more impactful is the silence that follows. People rarely explain why they distance themselves. They simply change their behavior. And in that silence, clarity begins to form. You start noticing who checks in without needing a reason, who supports without being asked, and who remains present even when there is no benefit attached. At the same time, you also begin to recognize who only appears when something is required. This process can feel painful, but it is also deeply educational. It teaches you to stop measuring relationships by emotional intensity alone and start observing consistency. Feelings can be strong in one moment and disappear in another, but consistent behavior is harder to fake over time. That is why time becomes the most honest judge of human connections. It removes illusion and leaves behind truth. Eventually, this understanding brings a different kind of strength. You stop chasing those who are inconsistent, and you stop over-investing in people who only show partial presence in your life. Instead, you begin to value stability over intensity and sincerity over attention. You learn that real connection does not fluctuate with convenience. It remains steady even when circumstances are not perfect. In the end, time does not destroy relationships. It reveals them. It shows who was truly there for you and who was only passing through your life for a moment. And once you see that clearly, you stop holding on to temporary presence and start valuing only those who choose to stay, not out of need, but out of genuine respect and understanding.